The billionaire's son was deaf and nobody spoke to him, until the new waitress walked up and started signing. Everyone froze in shock. How did she know sign language perfectly? Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The Sterling mansion stood on 20 acres of manicured perfection, a monument to wealth accumulated over 3 generations. Everything was perfect. Everything was cold. Noah Sterling sat alone at breakfast, his small hands gripping a silver spoon too large for his fingers. His nanny, Mrs. Patterson, stood at a discreet distance checking her phone. She never looked at him directly. Nobody did. The household staff had learned that talking to Noah was uncomfortable. How do you speak to a child who cannot hear you? It was easier to pretend he wasn't there, to work around him like furniture. Marcus Sterling was aware of his son's existence the way he was aware of his corporate holdings, through quarterly reports. Noah was 6 years old, and his father had never heard him laugh because Noah had never heard his own father's voice. That morning, Marcus was in his office, surrounded by monitors displaying stock prices. His executive assistant stood nearby with a tablet. Marcus was expecting lunch at noon. What he wasn't expecting was that everything was about to shift. In the kitchen, the head chef, Philippe, was in a foul mood. One of his sous chefs had called in sick, and they were short-staffed for the evening's dinner party. "We need another pair of hands," he declared, "someone competent." The kitchen manager, Susan, interrupted gently. "I can call the staffing agency. They sent us someone yesterday. She was reliable and quick." Grace Chen arrived at 11 o'clock, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She was 25, a server who worked temporary positions across the city. She was invisible to most people, and she had made peace with that invisibility long ago. What she hadn't made peace with was the isolation of childhood, the absence of connection, the terrible silence that surrounded those who couldn't hear. Grace moved through the kitchen like water, efficient and adaptable. But during the afternoon preparation, when the kitchen was momentarily quiet, everything changed. Noah had wandered down from the 3rd floor, something he rarely did. He stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the organized chaos with wide eyes. Grace was arranging garnishes when she noticed him. Most people didn't notice Noah, they looked past him. But Grace had spent her entire childhood noticing invisible people. She set down her tweezers and turned to face the boy directly. Then slowly, and with practiced grace, she lifted her hands and made a simple gesture. A wave, accompanied by a warm and genuine smile entirely focused on him. Noah's eyes widened, and then, with hesitation born from years of being ignored, he lifted his own hand and waved back. Grace began to sign, to. It was slow and clear, each letter and symbol formed with precision. Her hands told a story in the language that was as natural to her as breathing. "What is your name?" she signed. Noah didn't respond immediately. Nobody had ever asked him anything in a way he could understand. But something in Grace's face, the open expectation, the genuine interest, the complete lack of pity, gave him courage. His small hands moved uncertainly, forming the letters N-O-A-H. Grace's smile widened into something luminous. "Noah," she signed. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Grace." Philippe emerged from the pantry at that moment and stopped dead. Susan turned to see what had caused the sudden silence. Both of them watched as the young server communicated with the invisible child in a language that seemed to bloom between them like a secret garden suddenly revealed. The conversation between Grace and Noah continued for another 5 minutes, a conversation that made the boy laugh, actually laugh, a sound that had never been heard in the Sterling mansion before. It was high and clear and utterly joyful. Upstairs, in his office, Marcus felt his phone buzzing with a message. The stock market had moved 3 points in his favor. He didn't feel anything. But downstairs, his son was laughing for the first time in years, and neither of them knew it yet. By the time Marcus stepped into the dining room that evening, he had heard nothing of the morning's events. The staff had learned long ago that involving the master of the house in matters concerning Noah was rarely appreciated. But the dinner party that night was where everything began to unravel. 12 of the city's most influential businessmen and women sat around a table of polished mahogany, discussing market trends and acquisitions. Marcus sat at the head of the table, commanding the conversation with absolute certainty. Grace moved between the diners with practiced grace, filling water glasses, clearing plates. She was, by design, invisible, beautiful in a way people didn't notice because she was supposed to blend into the background. But something shifted when Senator Patricia Hawthorne, a woman of 63 with silver hair and sharp eyes, called her over. "You sign, don't you?" the senator said, studying Grace's face with sudden intensity. "With your hands. I saw you earlier." The entire table went silent. Marcus's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "Yes, ma'am," Grace said carefully. "I know American Sign Language." "How did you learn?" Senator Hawthorne asked. Grace hesitated, but something about the senator's gaze suggested genuine curiosity. "My sister was deaf," Grace said quietly. "She passed away when I was 12. We learned sign language together when I was very young." The silence that followed had weight to it. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He found himself staring at Grace, this young woman whom he had never noticed before. "How old was she?" Senator Hawthorne continued. 7, Grace said. "She had a neurological condition that was progressive." Marcus understood in that moment that this young woman had chosen to learn an entire language out of love for someone. He thought about his son, who lived in the same house, who slept down the hall, and with whom he had never attempted to build any kind of meaningful bridge. After dinner, as guests were departing, Marcus found himself standing near the kitchen doorway. Grace was arranging leftover food in containers. "You," he said, the word coming out more abruptly than he intended. Grace turned, her expression carefully neutral. She recognized authority in the way he held himself. Wealth and power announced themselves. "Yes, sir," she said. "You communicated with my son this morning," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Grace confirmed. "He's a lovely boy." "I have never seen him laughing," Marcus said, and the words came out as an accusation. Grace met his gaze steadily. Perhaps no one ever gave him the chance before. The words struck Marcus with the force of a physical blow. "How much are you being paid?" "The standard staffing rate," Grace said, $15 an hour plus meals. Marcus made a decision that would prove to be one of the most significant of his life. "I would like to hire you," he said, "as Noah's companion. A full-time position, room and board, plus a salary of $100,000 per year." Grace's eyes widened. "I'm a server. I don't have any qualifications." "You have the only qualification that matters," Marcus interrupted. "You can communicate with him. You can see him. I'll have my attorney draw up a contract." It wasn't romantic, not yet. It wasn't even kind. It was Marcus Sterling attempting to purchase what he didn't understand. But it was also the moment when he began to transform into a man capable of genuine connection. Grace should have refused. Instead, she thought about Noah's laugh, that pure sound of joy absent from the mansion for so long. She thought about being invisible forever, serving other people's tables, never putting down roots. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "Don't think too long," Marcus said. "Noah deserves better than thinking." That night, Grace lay awake thinking about a little boy who couldn't hear and a billionaire father who couldn't listen. She thought about her sister, about the bridge of language she had built and then lost. She thought about the possibility of building that bridge again for someone else, for Noah. By morning, she had decided. She called the staffing agency and told them she was taking a full-time position. She packed her few possessions and drove to the Sterling mansion. The east wing of the Sterling mansion had been converted into Grace's living quarters, a suite larger than the entire apartment she had rented for the past 3 years. Within 3 days, she had made it feel like home by adding small touches: a photograph of her sister, a collection of books, a blanket that smelled like lavender. Her official duties were vague. Marcus had instructed that Grace was to be part of the family, to accompany Noah throughout his day, to facilitate his education and development. Grace became the center of Noah's world, the one person who spoke to him, saw him, engaged with him as a complete and valued human being rather than a problem to be managed. The first week was about building trust. Grace learned that Noah had anxiety about new people, that he was intelligent and curious, that he had been taught basic sign language, but that nobody had bothered to continue the communication. She learned that his favorite color was blue, and that he was terrified of the dark. She moved into his daily routine with gentleness. Each morning, she would wake him with a simple sign: "Good morning, Noah." Each evening before bed, she would tell him stories in sign language, elaborate narratives that painted pictures in the air and made him laugh. The transformation was visible. Within 2 weeks, Noah had stopped the anxious behaviors. Within a month, he was initiating conversations with Grace, his small hands moving with increasing confidence to tell her about his dreams. Marcus watched this transformation with something approaching awe. He found himself making excuses to be present when Grace and Noah were together, observing the way his son's face lit up when communicating with her. He realized with shame that his son was far more intelligent than he had given him credit for, that Noah's silence had never indicated emptiness, but rather a profound loneliness. 2 months into Grace's employment, Marcus called her to his office. She climbed the stairs with trepidation, unsure if she had done something wrong. Marcus was standing near the window, looking out at the gardens below. "I've been watching you with Noah," he said finally. "I've been watching the way he laughs when you're around, the way he's begun to develop into a person instead of just existing as an absence in the house." "He's a wonderful child," Grace said carefully. "I don't know him," Marcus said, and the words seemed to cost him something. "I have a son, and I don't know him. I've spent 6 years in the same house with him, and I've never actually met him." Grace didn't know what to say. Honesty seemed both cruel and necessary. "It's not too late," she said finally. "He loves you. Children have the ability to forgive what adults would consider unforgivable." Marcus turned to face her. "Will you teach me?" Teach you what?" "Sign language," Marcus said. "I want to talk to my son. I want to hear what he thinks about, what he dreams about. I want to know him." It was the beginning of something new. Every evening after Noah was asleep, Grace would sit with Marcus in the library and teach him the language of his son. It was awkward at first. Marcus's hands were too large, his movements too stiff, but he was driven by something that felt suspiciously like love. 3 months into Grace's employment, Marcus sat down with Noah and attempted for the first time to have a conversation entirely in sign language. The signs were imperfect, the pace was slow, but he told his son that he loved him, that he was sorry for the years of silence, that he wanted to know him better. Noah's face transformed. He threw his arms around his father's neck, and Marcus, who couldn't remember the last time he had been hugged by anyone, held his son and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. Grace watched this moment from the doorway and felt tears slide down her cheeks. This was why she had taken the job, the possibility of connection, the bridge between 2 people separated by silence and misunderstanding. But as the months progressed, something else began to happen. Marcus had begun to notice Grace in a way entirely separate from his gratitude. He noticed the way the sunlight caught in her hair when she sat with Noah in the garden. He noticed the intelligence in her eyes when she read, the strength in her voice when she defended Noah. He noticed her, and the noticing became something that both thrilled and terrified him. By the 6th month, Grace and Marcus had developed a routine of late-night conversations in the kitchen. Noah would be asleep upstairs, and the mansion would be silent, except for the sound of their voices as they sat at the kitchen table, drinking tea and discussing everything from philosophy to Marcus's business challenges. Grace knew things about Marcus that his closest associates didn't know. She knew that his ruthlessness was armor against insecurity, that his emotional distance was learned behavior from absent parents, that beneath the billionaire persona was a man who was desperately lonely and slowly learning how to connect. Marcus knew things about Grace that she had never told anyone else. He knew that her sister's death had fractured her family, that her parents had divorced 2 years later, that she had put herself through college working service jobs. He knew that she was the strongest person he had ever met, and he was absolutely terrified of letting himself fall in love with her. But falling in love was already happening, whether he intended it or not. 6 months became 9. 9 months became a year. Noah had begun attending a specialized school 2 days per week. He had made friends, actual friends who communicated with him, who invited him to birthday parties, who saw him as someone worth knowing. Marcus had transformed from an absent father into someone who signed bedtime stories, who attended his son's school events, who introduced Noah to business colleagues with obvious pride. The other billionaires in his social circle found this change baffling and somehow threatening. But the transformation in Marcus went deeper. He began to examine his business practices with new eyes. He discovered that he had no ethical problems with activities that caused harm to others, and he decided this might need to change. He hired a new head of corporate responsibility. He began to divest from industries that exploited vulnerable populations. It was slow work, but work that felt, for the first time, meaningful. Through all of this, Grace remained the quiet center around which everything else orbited. She was present at all of Noah's important moments, but she was also becoming something else to Marcus, something that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged, but that both felt with increasing intensity. The first time it became undeniable was on Noah's 7th birthday, exactly 1 year after Grace had come to the house. Marcus had organized a party in the garden, complete with an entertainment team that performed in sign language. Grace had helped plan everything, but she remained in the background, ensuring Noah was comfortable. Later that evening, after Noah was asleep and the guests had departed, Marcus found Grace sitting alone on the terrace, looking out at the city lights spreading below the mansion like fallen stars. "Thank you," he said. Grace turned, unsurprised by his presence. By this point, her awareness of him had become something almost physical. "For what?" she asked, though she knew. "For everything," Marcus said. "For seeing him, for loving him, for making him feel like he matters." "He does matter," Grace said simply. "He's mattered all along. He just needed someone to notice." Marcus sat down beside her, leaving enough space to avoid impropriety, but not enough to mistake it for indifference. The space between them felt charged. "I've been thinking about making changes to my will," Marcus said. "I want to make sure that Noah is taken care of, that his needs are understood and protected. But more than that, I want to make sure that you're taken care of as well." "That's not necessary," Grace said, but her voice was soft, uncertain. "It is," Marcus said. "You could work for anyone, earn significantly more, but you choose to stay here. That choice has value." "That's not why I stay," Grace said, and the words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Marcus turned to look at her. In the moonlight, her features were softened. He could see the girl she must have been, the woman she had become, and the person she was becoming in this present moment. "I know," he said quietly. "That's what makes it matter." He reached over and took her hand. It was the first time they had touched outside of formal courtesies. Her hand was small in his, but it felt strong, capable, real. "Marcus," Grace said, and his name sounded different in her voice. "We can't." "Can't what?" he asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "This," Grace said, gesturing to the space between them. "Me and you. I work for you. I live in your house. There's a fundamental power imbalance." "Is being corrected," Marcus interrupted. "Effective immediately. I'm no longer your employer. I'll transfer your employment to an independent trust. You'll still work with Noah. You'll still live here if you want to, but I will no longer be your boss." "That's absurd," Grace said. "You can't just—" "I'm a billionaire," Marcus said, and there was an almost smile in his voice. "I can do almost anything. I can certainly restructure my own household to allow myself the possibility of not being a complete fool." Grace looked away, struggling with something internal. "I need time," she said finally. "This is moving very fast, and I need to make sure that I'm thinking clearly and not just falling into something because of proximity and gratitude." Marcus released her hand, though the loss of contact physically pained him. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But Grace, there's no scenario in which I stop loving you. You can take a year to think about it, and at the end of that year, I'll still be waiting." It was the first time he had said it explicitly, the first time the word love had passed between them. Grace felt it like a weight and a gift simultaneously. She excused herself and went to her room, where she lay awake until dawn, trying to separate her own feelings from the complexity of the situation, trying to determine if what she felt was genuine love or simply the comfort of being known by someone for the first time in her life. The complication arrived by courier on a Tuesday morning in the form of a certified letter from Senator William Sterling, the family patriarch. The letter outlined concerns about Marcus's recent business decisions, characterized his philanthropic efforts as reckless destruction of family assets, and suggested that Marcus was being unduly influenced by an employee of unclear background and questionable character. In other words, the family had noticed that Grace existed, and they had decided that her existence was a threat. That evening, Marcus held a family meeting in the formal dining room. Senator William Sterling arrived with Marcus's Aunt Patricia, her husband Robert, and their son David, who worked in one of the Sterling family companies. Senator William was 71, with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested a life spent convincing other people to do things they didn't want to do. "We're concerned about you, Marcus," the senator began, his tone suggesting genuine worry. "Your recent business decisions have cost our family nearly $200 million. You've divested from profitable industries, hired environmental consultants, and implemented labor reforms. Our analysts are suggesting you're having some kind of mental breakdown." "I'm having a change of perspective," Marcus said calmly. "The business will adapt and thrive. Profit doesn't require the exploitation of vulnerable populations." "This is about the girl, isn't it?" Aunt Patricia said, not bothering with subtlety. "The servant you've taken into your household. The one who's living in the East Wing like she's family." Marcus felt his anger rise. Grace is a valued member of this household, and more importantly, she's a trusted companion to Noah. Her background is irrelevant. "Is it?" William leaned forward. "Because our investigators have found some interesting information about Miss Chen. Her parents' marriage ended in divorce 2 years after her sister's death. Her mother attempted suicide when Grace was 19. Her father abandoned his responsibilities and moved to California. She's had unstable housing for most of her adult life. Doesn't that suggest a pattern of instability, of potential gold-digging behavior?" Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward with a harsh sound. "You are not going to attack the character of someone you don't know in order to protect your financial interests." "Financial interests." William's eyes went cold. Marcus, you have a 6-year-old son. His future is the only financial interest that should concern you. And right now, his welfare is in the hands of a young woman with a history of family trauma and economic desperation. She's primed to take advantage of your feelings, to manipulate you into transferring assets, to position herself as the stepmother of the heir to a billion-dollar fortune. The words were weapons, carefully crafted to exploit Marcus's deepest fears. The truth was that Marcus had been terrified that his feelings for Grace were a mistake, that he was romanticizing her, that perhaps she was indeed manipulating him. But he had learned over the past year to trust his instincts about people who mattered. And his instincts about Grace were absolutely certain. "This conversation is over," Marcus said coldly. "You will not return to this house. You will not contact me regarding my personal life. You will not attempt to interfere with my custody of Noah or my relationship with Grace. If you attempt any of these things, I will use the entirety of my legal and financial resources to ensure that you regret it. Do we understand each other?" Senator Williams stood as well, his face flushing with anger. "You're throwing away your family." "No," Marcus said. "I'm choosing what family means. You are not it." The family left within the hour, but their poison remained. Marcus found Grace in the library, reading to Noah. "I need to tell you something," he said. Grace set down her book and sent Noah to get a snack. Once they were alone, she waited for Marcus to speak. He told her everything. The accusations, the threat of investigation, the suggestion that she was a gold digger. Grace listened without interrupting, her expression growing more thoughtful. "Are you going to ask me if it's true?" she asked when he finished. "No," Marcus said, "because I already know the answer. What matters is what comes next." "What comes next is that I can't stay here," Grace said slowly. "If I do, it will become a legal liability for you. Your family will use our relationship against you, will try to manipulate Noah's custody, will create a scandal that damages everything you've built." "Then we'll leave," Marcus said, "all three of us. We'll go somewhere they can't touch us." "You can't run from your own life," Grace said. "You have responsibilities, companies, employees. You can't just abandon all of it." "Watch me," Marcus said. "My companies are fine. Noah is my only responsibility that matters. You are my only responsibility that matters. Everything else is negotiable." Grace felt something crack inside her, a protective wall she had built against the possibility of true love. She had spent her entire adult life being responsible, being careful. But Marcus was offering her something she had never had. The feeling of being chosen completely, without reservation. "I need you to be absolutely certain," she said. "Because if I stay, if I accept this, there's no backing away. I'm not going to be a temporary comfort. I'm not going to leave when things get hard. If you choose me, you're choosing something permanent." "I know," Marcus said, "and I choose you. I choose Noah, and the three of us building a life together. I choose you, completely and without condition." It wasn't a proposal, not yet, but it was a commitment deeper than any contract. Grace reached for his hand, and this time she didn't let go. Winter came to the city with unusual severity. The Sterling mansion seemed to grow colder as the season deepened. Grace had officially ended her employment relationship with Marcus, and they had begun, tentatively and carefully, to become something other than employer and employee. They didn't publicize the change. Not yet. Noah was too young to fully understand adult romance, and the appearance of propriety still mattered in their circles. Their arrangement was simple. Grace continued to care for Noah during the day, but in the evenings, she and Marcus would spend time together, talking, walking through the mansion's grounds, beginning to build the architecture of a shared future. They had not yet become physical, not yet crossed that final bridge into complete intimacy. It was during the second week of December that Noah became ill, At first, it seemed like nothing more than a cold, sniffling, coughing, the kind of minor illness that children experience regularly. Mrs. Patterson administered the standard remedies, fluids, rest, over-the-counter medications. Grace monitored his condition carefully. But by the fourth day, it became clear that this was not a simple cold. Noah's fever climbed to 103 degrees and refused to come down with medication. He became lethargic, listless, unable to focus even on his favorite activities. His cough became deep and troubling. Marcus called the pediatrician, who recommended rest and observation. The pediatrician came to the house and examined Noah, listened to his lungs, and recommended that they monitor his oxygen levels. If his breathing became labored, they would need to take him to the hospital. Grace was the one who noticed when Noah's breathing began to change. She was sitting beside his bed, as she did every night when he was ill, and she heard the shift from normal breathing to something more labored, the subtle wheeze that indicated his airways were becoming constricted. "Marcus," she called out, her voice calm but urgent, "we need to go to the hospital now." They arrived at Presbyterian Medical Center at 11 o'clock at night. Noah was immediately admitted to the pediatric emergency department, where tests revealed what the initial assessments had missed: pneumonia that was progressing toward sepsis, a bacterial infection spreading through his small body with terrifying efficiency. The doctors explained, with careful compassion, that Noah would need to be admitted to the intensive care unit, that he would require intravenous antibiotics, oxygen support, and constant monitoring. The infection was severe, but they had caught it early enough that his prognosis was good. However, there were risks, and the next 48 hours would be critical. Marcus experienced a kind of terror that he had never felt before. All of his money, all of his power, all of his influence meant nothing in the face of a 6-year-old boy struggling to breathe. He found himself praying, something he hadn't done since childhood, making promises to a God he wasn't sure existed, that if Noah would be okay, he would spend the rest of his life being grateful. Grace remained steady in a way that Marcus couldn't quite manage. She stayed by Noah's side, explaining in sign language what was happening, what the machines were doing, that everyone was here to help him, that he was going to be okay. She held his hand through the insertion of the IV, comforted him when the oxygen mask made him claustrophobic, signed to him when he was frightened. Marcus watched her, and in that watching, something fundamental shifted in his understanding of love. It wasn't romantic love in the moment. Those were thoughts that had no place when his son's life was in question. It was something deeper, something that recognized Grace's strength, her courage, her complete commitment to Noah without reservation or condition. It was the kind of love built on the foundation of watching someone do the right thing, even when it cost them something. The first 48 hours passed in a blur. By the third day, there was cautious improvement. His fever had come down, his oxygen levels were beginning to stabilize, the antibiotics were attacking the infection effectively. The doctors began to talk about discharge timelines, about continued treatment at home, about the possibility that Noah would make a full recovery. On the fourth day, Noah's condition had improved enough that he was removed from the intensive care unit and moved to a regular pediatric ward. Marcus and Grace both collapsed in the waiting room after the move, the tension that had been holding them upright for 96 hours finally releasing. "I thought I was going to lose him," Marcus said, his voice hoarse, "and in that moment when I thought I might lose him, I realized that I didn't care about anything else. Not the company, not the money, not my reputation. None of it mattered compared to keeping him alive." Grace reached for his hand. They were alone in the waiting room, the fluorescent lights harsh and unflattering, and neither of them cared how they looked or what anyone might think of their proximity. "He's going to be okay," Grace said, "and that's because he has two people who love him completely. He has you and he has me, and that's more powerful than any infection, any illness. Marry me," Marcus said. Grace's eyes widened. Marcus, you're exhausted. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have in my life, Marcus said. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to be with you when things are good and when things are terrifying. I want to raise Noah with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and know that I'm exactly where I belong. I want to give you the kind of life that your parents couldn't give you, the kind of stability and love and security that you deserve. So please, marry me. Not because I'm grateful, not because I'm afraid, but because you are the person I love most in this world. Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. She had spent so much of her life protecting herself against disappointment, against the possibility of loss, that she had nearly missed this opportunity to find something real. Yes, she said, I'll marry you. Capítulo 7. The Transformation. They didn't have a large wedding. Marcus had learned enough about himself to understand that massive public displays were not the way he wanted to celebrate something as personal and precious as a marriage. Instead, they planned something intimate, a ceremony in the Sterling family gardens, attended by only those who truly mattered, close friends, Noah's friends from school, the household staff. The wedding was scheduled for the spring, giving them time for Noah to fully recover from his illness, time for Grace to plan a wedding that reflected her style, time for Marcus to begin the complicated process of introducing his relationship with Grace to the wider world. But the period between Noah's illness and the wedding became something unexpected. It became a transformation not just of the Sterling household, but of Marcus Sterling himself. In the weeks following Noah's recovery, Marcus made a series of decisions that shocked his business associates and infuriated his family. He announced his engagement to Grace Chen at a company shareholder meeting, presenting her not as a charity case or a romantic indulgence, but as a respected member of the household and a woman who had earned his love through her actions and her character. The announcement was met with stunned silence, followed by frenzied calls to his family's attorneys. But Marcus had anticipated their response. He had already moved to protect himself and Grace. He had restructured his assets to ensure that even if his family attempted to challenge the engagement or the marriage, they had no legal ground to stand on. Grace had signed prenuptial agreements, not out of love for protecting assets, but because she understood that by doing so, she was protecting Marcus from the accusation that she was a gold digger. The company underwent a transformation as well. Marcus hired a new chief financial officer, a woman named Jessica Chen, no relation to Grace, who had been an advocate for corporate responsibility and sustainable business practices. Together, they began the long process of transitioning Sterling Company from a purely profit-driven organization to one that measured success not only in financial returns, but in social impact and environmental responsibility. It wasn't a smooth transition. Some shareholders were furious about decreasing profit margins. Some executives left because they didn't believe in the new direction. Some business partners decided they no longer wanted to work with an organization prioritizing ethics over expedience. But for every person who left, there were 3 new people who wanted to be part of something meaningful, who wanted to work for a company attempting to make the world slightly better. Marcus was working less, which meant he was present more. He was at Noah's school events. He was there for bedtime stories and breakfast conversations and casual afternoons in the garden. He was becoming the father that he should have been from the beginning. Grace, meanwhile, was continuing her education. With Marcus's encouragement, she had enrolled in a master's program in education with a focus on deaf and hard-of-hearing students. Her dream was to develop curriculum that would help deaf children integrate into mainstream schools while maintaining their connection to deaf culture and sign language. Marcus had created a scholarship in her name, to help other young people from disadvantaged backgrounds pursue similar goals. The transformation was not without complications. Grace's parents, whom she hadn't seen in years, suddenly wanted to renew their relationship now that she was engaged to a billionaire. Her mother called to congratulate her, her voice warm with emotion, and Grace had to work through decades of complicated feelings about abandonment and the desire to be wanted. Her father showed up at the mansion without warning, ostensibly to congratulate her, but really to ask if Marcus would invest in a business venture he was pursuing in California. Grace had to be the one to say no, to set boundaries with her father that should have been set years ago, to make it clear that their relationship could be rebuilt on the basis of genuine connection rather than financial opportunity. It was difficult and necessary work, the kind of work that helped Grace become more whole, that helped her move beyond the trauma of her childhood and into a place of adult autonomy and choice. Marcus supported her through all of it, never offering to solve her problems or use his money to make them go away, but rather standing beside her while she solved them herself. He was learning slowly that true love meant respecting someone's agency and strength, rather than attempting to protect them from difficulty. The night before the wedding, they couldn't sleep. Both of them found themselves in the library at 3 a.m, unable to quiet their minds, unable to stop thinking about how much had changed in the past 2 years. "Do you ever wonder if you're dreaming?" Grace asked. "If you're going to wake up and find that I'm not really here?" "But every day," Marcus admitted. "But then I remember that the reality is even better than any fantasy could be. In a fantasy, you wouldn't have your own opinions and your own goals and your own plans that don't center around me. In reality, you're a complete person who chose to share her life with me. That's infinitely better." "I was so afraid of this," Grace said. "I was afraid that if I let myself love you, I would lose myself in the process, that I would become one of those women who disappears into their relationship and forgets who they were before." "Would I let you do that?" Marcus asked gently. "No," Grace said. "That's why I'm not afraid anymore." The wedding ceremony took place on a perfect spring afternoon. The gardens were blooming with flowers carefully selected to peak on this exact date. Roses in shades of pink and cream, white peonies, delicate sweet peas in lavender and white. Grace wore a simple white dress, elegant and understated, with intricate beading that caught the light when she moved. Her hair was pulled back in a style that showed her face clearly, and when she walked toward Marcus, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that she was radiant with happiness. Noah stood beside his father, wearing a small tuxedo that made him look absurdly grown up. He was holding a small sign that he had made with help from Grace that said, in large letters, "I love you, Grace," in both English and the sign language alphabet. The ceremony was conducted by a judge who was a friend of Marcus's, someone who had watched the transformation of the Sterling household and who genuinely cared about the couple being united. Grace's mother was there, seated in the front row, crying quietly. Several of Grace's friends from school were also present. The vows they exchanged were written by both of them, not the traditional words people sometimes use because they're expected to, but actual words that meant something specific about their relationship and their commitment to each other. "I vow," Marcus said, his voice steady and clear, "to love you, not despite your strength, but because of it. To support your dreams and your ambitions without trying to control them. To be present for Noah as his father, and to be present for you as your partner. To face difficult things together rather than trying to solve them alone. To never take for granted the gift that you are, every single day, for the rest of my life. Dean, I vow," Grace said, her voice filled with emotion, "to love you unconditionally and to accept your love without fear. To help you continue to grow and change and become the best version of yourself. To be a mother to Noah in every way that matters. To choose you every day, for the rest of my life, in sickness and in health, in abundance and in struggle, to build a life with you that is meaningful and real and completely, utterly ours." When they kissed, the small gathered crowd erupted in applause. Noah jumped up and down, signing, "They kissed, they kissed," over and over again, and his joy was so pure, so unburdened, that it seemed to validate everything that had led to this moment. The reception was held in a large tent in the gardens, with tables arranged in a way that encouraged conversation. The food was simple but excellent, prepared by Philippe with only slightly less drama than he usually brought to such occasions. There were speeches and laughter and dancing, and through it all, Marcus never let go of Grace's hand. It was Senator William Sterling who arrived uninvited in the middle of the reception, his face dark with anger. He had attempted to prevent the wedding through legal channels, arguing that Marcus was mentally unfit to manage his estate. The motion had been dismissed by the judge. He walked directly to the tent, and the crowd fell silent as the patriarch of the Sterling family made his presence known. "This is a mistake," Senator William announced, his voice carrying across the gathered guests. "This woman has manipulated you, boy. She's taken advantage of your emotional vulnerability following your son's illness. When you come to your senses, and you will, you'll realize what a fool you've been." Marcus stood, still holding Grace's hand, and looked his uncle directly in the eye. "You're right about one thing," he said calmly. "I was a fool. I was a fool for 32 years, building a life that meant nothing, accumulating things that had no value, surrounding myself with people who wanted my money but didn't want me. Grace didn't manipulate me. She changed me. She showed me that there was a different way to live, a better way to live, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life being grateful for that change." "You're throwing away your family," William said. "No," Marcus said, and he pulled Grace closer to him, then turned to look at Noah, who was watching the exchange with worried eyes. Marcus signed to his son, "It's okay. We're okay." Then he turned back to his uncle. "You were never my family. Family is what I'm building right here. Family is the people who choose each other, who show up for each other, who love each other completely. So yes, I'm throwing away you. And I've never made a better decision in my life." Security removed Senator William from the property. He left screaming promises of legal action and threats to destroy Marcus's reputation. But his exit was the opening of a door, not the closing of one. After he left, the reception continued with even greater joy, as if everyone present understood that they had just witnessed the moment when Marcus Sterling finally became free. That night, in a suite at the hotel where they had chosen to spend their wedding night, Marcus and Grace became fully intimate for the first time. It was gentle and passionate, tender and overwhelming, a physical expression of the emotional connection that had been building between them since the moment she had communicated with his son in sign language. Afterward, lying beside her in the darkness, Marcus whispered, "I love you." "I love you too," Grace replied. And it was the truth said in the dark, with no one listening, promised to no one but each other. It was the most precious kind of truth, the kind that didn't require validation or proof, the kind that simply existed between two people who had found each other against impossible odds. T-Tup-Tis-T-D. Capitulo 9. The Weight of Secrets. A year into their marriage, Marcus began to receive regular visits from attorneys and financial advisors who brought troubling news. Senator William Sterling was continuing his legal challenges, attempting to prove that Marcus was incompetent to manage his assets, that his marriage to Grace was predatory, that his decisions regarding the company were damaging the family's financial interests. The legal battles were expensive and exhausting, but Marcus had anticipated them. He had prepared by ensuring that every decision regarding the company was thoroughly documented and legally sound. His attorneys assured him that his uncle's claims had no merit. But there was something else that troubled Marcus, something deeper than legal battles. As Grace's education progressed, and she prepared to graduate from her master's program, as she began work on her first curriculum development project, Marcus realized that he was terrified of something he had never articulated before. He was terrified that Grace would eventually realize that she had compromised herself by staying with him. He was terrified that she would look back on her life and feel that she had given up opportunities, that she had limited herself by committing to a relationship with someone whose life was complicated and public and surrounded by conflict. He was terrified that one day she would realize that the normal, peaceful life she could have had with someone else was worth more than the intensity and passion that came with being married to him. It was this fear that led him to do something unforgivable. He hired a private investigator to determine whether Grace had ever been unfaithful to him, whether she had ever expressed doubts about their relationship to friends or therapists, whether she had ever looked at another man with anything approaching romantic interest. The investigator's report was clean. Grace was faithful, devoted, and deeply committed to their marriage. But the fact that Marcus had commissioned the investigation at all revealed something broken inside him, something that wasn't healed despite everything that had happened. Grace discovered the existence of the investigation by accident. She found the final report on his desk when she was looking for something else, and her reaction was not anger, but profound hurt. She confronted him about it that evening, after Noah was asleep, and her words cut deep because she was right to be wounded. "You don't trust me," she said simply. "Despite everything I've shown you, everything I've sacrificed, you still believe that I'm capable of betrayal." "It wasn't about you," Marcus said, trying to explain something that couldn't really be explained. "It was about my fear of losing you." "And that's supposed to make it better?" Grace asked. "That you violated my privacy, hired someone to spy on me because you were afraid? Marcus, that's not love, that's control. That's the behavior of someone who hasn't actually changed at all." The accusation struck him with the force of physical violence because he recognized the truth in it. He had changed many things about himself, but the fundamental insecurity, the fundamental fear of not being enough, had never been fully addressed. He had simply buried it deeper. "I'm sorry," he said. "Grace, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was afraid, and I was wrong." "Sorry isn't enough," Grace said, and Marcus felt his heart stop. "We need to go to counseling. We need to talk to someone who can help us address this, because if you don't resolve this fear, it's going to keep growing, and eventually it's going to destroy us." They started therapy the following week, both of them together. Grace had a separate therapist as well, someone who helped her process her anger and her fear about what the investigation revealed. Marcus worked with his therapist to understand where his insecurity came from, to trace it back to a childhood in which he had been wanted only for his potential to continue the family legacy, not for who he actually was. The therapy was difficult and painful. There were sessions where they argued, where Grace told him things that were hard to hear, where Marcus had to face truths about himself that were uncomfortable and unflattering. But there were also sessions where they connected on a deeper level, where they understood each other more fully, where they recommitted to their relationship with more knowledge and more maturity. 3 months into therapy, Grace told Marcus something that she had been waiting to share at exactly the right moment. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. Marcus felt the world tilt. "Grace, are you sure?" "I did 3 tests," she said. "I'm sure." It was a moment of pure joy, untainted by the complications that had been surrounding them. A baby, a new person who would be a product of their love, who would be a sibling to Noah, who would bind their family together in a new way. "I love you," Marcus said, holding her carefully. "I'm sorry for everything, and I promise you that I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning the right to have you love me back." "You don't have to earn it," Grace said. Love doesn't work that way. But I do ask that you keep working on yourself. Keep going to therapy. Keep trying to be the man that you're becoming, rather than retreating into the man you used to be. I will, Marcus promised. For you, for Noah, for this baby, for myself. I will. The birth of their daughter, Emma, on a cold morning in January, changed everything and nothing simultaneously. Everything changed because the household now revolved around a newborn, because Marcus experienced parenting from the beginning rather than from 6 years in, because Grace was transformed into motherhood in a way that only people who have given birth can understand. Nothing changed because their love for each other deepened rather than shifted. Noah was protective of his baby sister from the moment he met her. He brought her toys, made signs to her, sat beside her bassinet with an intensity that suggested he was responsible for keeping her safe. Grace had worried about how he would respond to the baby, whether he would feel displaced or resentful. But Noah, who had spent his early life feeling displaced and unseen, had no interest in inflicting that pain on anyone else. The first year of Emma's life passed in a blur of feeding and changing. But underneath the chaos was a quiet joy, a sense that the family that Marcus and Grace had built was exactly what it was supposed to be. It was during Emma's first birthday celebration that Marcus made an unexpected announcement. The extended family was gathered in the gardens, not his immediate family, which still mostly refused to acknowledge him, but the family he had built through choice, close friends, household staff, Grace's mother, colleagues from work. I have a decision to announce, Marcus said, standing with Grace at his side, their hands linked. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Sterling Companies. I will remain on the board and maintain a role in strategic direction, but I'm handing over the day-to-day operations to my Chief Financial Officer, Jessica Chen. I'm doing this because I want to spend more time with my family. I want to be present for Emma's childhood in a way that I wasn't able to be present for Noah's early years. I want to be a real father and a real partner. The decision shocked everyone. For the past decade, his identity had been almost entirely wrapped up in his role as the CEO of a major corporation. I'm also announcing the creation of the Sterling Foundation for Deaf Education and Accessibility, he continued. My wife, Grace, will be the executive director of this foundation, and she will dedicate herself to expanding educational opportunities for deaf and hard-of-hearing children, to developing curriculum that respects deaf culture while providing integration opportunities, and to creating a world in which children like my son Noah are not invisible, but are seen, heard, and celebrated for who they are. Grace squeezed his hand, tears sliding down her cheeks. This was her dream made manifest, funded by his wealth, but directed by her vision and her passion. It was the perfect expression of their partnership. His resources, her purpose, combined in a way that would benefit not just Noah, but thousands of other children. The foundation was incorporated within 6 months. Grace left her master's program with her degree completed and threw herself into the work of building something meaningful. She hired a team of educators, both deaf and hearing, who were passionate about the mission. She developed pilot programs in schools across the country. She fought for policy changes that would support deaf students in mainstream educational settings. Marcus supported all of this while spending more time with his children. He worked from home more often. He attended Noah's school events. He was the one who got up at night with Emma when she was teething, who watched her learn to crawl and then walk and then run through the garden. The mansion, which had once felt cold and sterile, became warm and alive with the sounds of children, the laughter that echoed through hallways, the evidence of a life being lived rather than simply endured. Senator William Sterling died suddenly of a stroke, 2 years after the wedding. Marcus attended the funeral out of respect for the family legacy, but he didn't mourn the loss of his uncle. He mourned instead the years that had been wasted in conflict. His Aunt Patricia reached out to him at the funeral, her anger finally worn down by time and the realization that fighting was futile. She asked about Noah and Emma, and Marcus, with the generosity that love had taught him, invited her to visit the house and meet her grandniece properly. The visit lasted 3 days, and by the end of it, Patricia had been transformed by the sight of Marcus being a good father, by the evidence of his transformation, by the reality of Grace as a woman who was intelligent and kind and absolutely devoted to her family. She never became close to them, but she stopped fighting against them. And that was enough. 5 years into their marriage, on the anniversary of the day Grace had first communicated with Noah in sign language, Marcus and Grace took their children to visit Grace's parents. Her mother had remained in contact with them over the years, but Grace's father had only recently expressed a desire to rebuild his relationship with his daughter. The visit was emotional and complicated. Grace's father, now elderly and facing his own mortality, wanted reconciliation that he might not have truly earned. But Grace, shaped by her therapist and by Marcus's example of transformation, was willing to offer him the possibility of redemption, understanding that people could change, that people could try to do better, even if they had failed terribly in the past. On the evening of their visit, after the children were asleep, Grace sat with her father on the porch of his home and talked about her childhood, about the pain of his abandonment, about her fear of repeating his patterns, about her gratitude for Marcus and the family they had built. "I'm proud of you," her father said finally. "I know I have no right to be, given how little I've been part of your life, but I'm proud of who you've become, and I'm grateful that you're giving me the chance to know you as an adult, even if I failed you as a father." Grace hugged him, and in that hug was the complicated forgiveness of adult children toward failing parents, not the erasure of pain, but the acknowledgement that people are flawed and complicated, and doing the best they can with what they have. Marcus waited inside, watching through the window, understanding that this was healing that could only happen if he stepped back and allowed Grace the space to work through her own complicated relationships. When she came back inside, her eyes were red, but her face was peaceful. "He's going to try," she said. "He's not going to be perfect, but he's going to try." "That's all anyone can do," Marcus said. Later that night, lying in the darkness of the guest bedroom, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this place. 5 years ago, he was a cold, isolated man, surrounded by wealth that meant nothing. Now he was warm, connected, rich in all the ways that actually mattered. He thought about Grace, about the day she had arrived at the mansion and changed everything with a simple gesture of kindness toward his invisible son. He thought about Noah, now 11 years old, thriving in school, confident in his identity as a deaf person, fluent in sign language and English, integrated but not assimilated. He thought about Emma, 5 years old, who spoke both spoken English and sign language fluently, who treated her brother's deafness as simply another fact of their family, who had never known a world in which her father was cold or distant. He thought about all the ways that he had been transformed, not through his own effort, but through his willingness to be transformed by the love and strength of the people around him. "Marcus?" Grace's voice came through the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes," he said. "I was thinking," she said, "about what you said, about how you were willing to leave everything to be with me and Noah. You never had to do that. But I also was thinking about how you didn't leave everything. You changed everything. You kept the good parts, your intelligence, your drive, your ability to build things, but you applied them toward something meaningful, toward making the world better, toward building a foundation that helps people, toward being a father and a partner. That's the real transformation, not leaving things behind, but redirecting them toward what actually matters." "I had help," Marcus said, reaching for her hand in the darkness. "I had you. I had Noah. I had people who believed that I could be more than what I was." "You did the work," Grace said. I just showed you that it was possible. 10 years after Grace had first communicated with Noah in sign language, the Sterling Foundation for Deaf Education had established programs in 32 states. Over 10,000 children had benefited from the curriculum that Grace had developed. Curriculum that honored deaf culture while providing tools for academic success and integration. Grace had published 3 books on deaf education, had been invited to speak at international conferences, had changed policy at the federal level to support the rights and education of deaf children. Marcus had stepped further back from business, though he remained involved in strategic decisions for Sterling companies. The company had transformed from a ruthlessly profit-driven organization into one that was recognized internationally for its commitment to sustainable practices and social responsibility. His decisions that his family had once called reckless had proven to be visionary. The company's stock had actually increased as investors became more interested in supporting organizations that aligned with their values. The mansion was no longer a monument to cold perfection. It was a home filled with the noise and mess and joy of a family living fully and completely. Noah was 16 years old now, fluent in 3 languages including sign language, a gifted student who had just been accepted early to Yale University. Emma was 10, brilliant and kind, planning to study deaf education like her mother, to continue the work that Grace had begun. There had been no fairy tale moments of sudden transformation, no moments where everything became perfect. There had been difficult conversations and hard decisions. There had been conflicts and misunderstandings. There had been nights when Marcus's insecurity threatened to destroy everything, and Grace had to remind him again that she was choosing him, that she had chosen him, that she would continue to choose him. But there had also been quiet moments of extraordinary beauty. There had been the sight of Marcus and Noah communicating completely and easily in sign language. There had been family dinners where everyone laughed at the same jokes, where no one was left out or isolated. There had been the moment when Emma had first signed "I love you" to her father, and Marcus had wept, understanding that he had broken a generational cycle, that his children would not inherit his cold distance from the world. On a spring afternoon, exactly 10 years to the day after Grace had first arrived at the mansion, Marcus sat with his entire family in the gardens. Noah and Emma were playing a game that involved sign language and running, a hybrid creation that was utterly theirs. Grace was reading a manuscript for a new book on deaf education. Marcus was watching them all, understanding that this moment, this ordinary, beautiful moment, was everything he had been missing when he was building his empire. Grace looked up from her manuscript and caught him watching her. She smiled, the same smile that had transformed his life a decade ago, and signed to him, across the distance of a few feet, "I love you." Marcus signed back, "I love you too." And it was true, deeply and completely true, in a way that required no fortune to maintain, no empire to validate, no power to sustain. It was the truth of a man who had been lost and found, who had been empty and filled, who had been silent and finally learned to listen. The story of Marcus Sterling and Grace Chen was not one of a rich man rescuing a poor woman or a powerful man discovering compassion. It was the story of 2 people who found each other at the precise moment when they both needed to be found, who had the courage to transform themselves and each other, who built something meaningful out of brokenness. It was the story of a silent bridge being built between people, one connection at a time, one gesture of love at a time, one choice to see and be seen, to hear and be heard, to love and be loved completely. And it was, in the end, the most precious story of all.